In the previous video of this series, I talked about the Adventures of Superman TV series from the 1950s, starring George Reeves. George Reeves was the first actor to play Superman on television, but he did not play Superman for the first time on television. The year before the Adventures of Superman debuted on TV, George Reeves played Superman in a feature film. The first feature film ever made about Superman, which also makes George Reeves technically the first actor to play Superman in a feature film. Bud Collyer played him in animated shorts, and Kirk Alyn played Superman in serials, not features. I think you'll find I'm correct. That feature film is called Superman and the Mole Men, and it is one of my favorite Superman movies, and one of my favorite Superman anythings, and I did not mention it once in my video about the Adventures of Superman TV series because I wanted to give it a video all to itself. So, here is the story of Superman and the Mole Men, and why I think it's so great. So, as I just said, Superman and the Mole Men was the first feature film ever made about Superman, which is not to say it was released with any great fanfare. Its creators saw it primarily as a vehicle to promote the upcoming TV series, and the studio that produced Superman and the Mole Men, Lippert Pictures, specialized in low-budget films, mostly cheapo westerns with occasional diversions into sci-fi and other genres of pulp adventure. Superman and the Mole Men was the studio's first foray into superhero movies. It was the first superhero feature film period, I think. Previous superhero movies had all been serials or animated shorts, and it's so much better than its B-grade budget or origins with a minor studio suggest. Like many low-budget films of the time, it was produced at a sprint. Principal photography took less than 2 weeks in July of 1951, and the movie was finished and released in late November of that same year. And the size of the film's budget is apparent in some of the endearingly cost-effective props, like the weapon used by the Mole People, which is obviously a slightly modified Electrolux vacuum cleaner. But where the quality of the film really shines through isn't the props, but the script. That script, credited to the fictitious Richard Fielding and actually written by Robert Maxwell and Whitney Ellsworth, who were also producers on the TV series, tells a story with almost none of the familiar trappings we've come to expect from a Superman story, especially a Superman movie. There's no Perry White, no Jimmy Olsen, no Daily Planet, in fact. The Daily Planet is mentioned. It's still the paper where Clark and Lois Lane work, but we never see it. The story doesn't even take place in Metropolis. The action is set entirely in the small Texas town of Silsbee, where Clark and Lois have been invited by the public relations man of an oil company to write an article about the recently drilled well, said to be the deepest in the world. Only, as Clark and Lois arrive on the scene, it looks like there may not be anything to write an article about. Corrigan, the foreman of the well, declares that it's being shut down. And he's not answering questions as to why, so don't even bother asking, you nosy big city reporters. Clark finds all this more than a little suspicious, so that night he and Lois leave their hotel and head back to the well site to do a bit of snooping around. Before they arrive, two little guys emerge from the top of the oil well shaft. These would be the Mole Men. When Clark and Lois get there a short time later, they find the night watchman lying dead on the floor of his shack. At first, they assume it must have been a heart attack, but when Clark leaves to have a look around, Lois catches sight of the Mole Men peering into the shack through a window and screams. Now, Lois has changed her mind about what killed the old night watchman. She's sure it must have been the Mole People she saw. No way it was a heart attack. The medical examiner arrives and says that, actually, a heart attack is exactly what it was. Corrigan, the foreman, is here too, and after some prodding from Clark, and after everyone else has gone, he finally reveals what's been going on and why he shut down the well. As the well was being drilled further and further down into the earth, Corrigan began taking samples of what they were drilling through. One night, purely by accident, he discovered that these samples glowed in the dark, and that the deeper into the earth the samples came from, the brighter they glowed. Then, after he took the last sample, the drill bit broke through into empty space, an empty space 6 miles deep. Corrigan took another sample from the drill bit and discovered microscopic life forms. Contrary to all previous scientific knowledge, something was alive 6 miles down, inside the hollow earth. So Corrigan shut down the well and capped the shaft. But while having a look around earlier, Clark noticed the cap had been opened. They come to the only logical conclusion. Those 2 mole people Lois saw must have climbed up the 6-mile oil shaft and crawled out the top. And guess what? Those 2 mole people are in Silsbee right now, walking through town, looking in windows, making friends with children. The fiends. The mole men have been sighted by a few people in town, and a panicky mob begins to gather in the lobby of the hotel. Clark shows up with Corrigan, who informs the townsfolk that the strange creatures they saw are visitors from the center of the earth who climbed out of the oil well. Surprisingly, this does nothing to calm the people of Silsbee. Instead, they hear a woman, the mother of the little girl being visited by the mole men, scream from the other side of town and take off, some of them picking up clubs as they go. Realizing that this is a job for Superman, Clark slips away for a quick change and flies ahead of the mob to the little girl's house. When the mob arrives, Superman tries to assure them that everything is fine. The little girl isn't harmed. Her mother saw the mole men and was just frightened, that's all. Luke Benson, leader of the mob, is like, "Whatever, Superman, I'm gonna get those mole people," and he takes off with a few others and a pack of dogs to chase down the mole people, who were spotted running away from the house. Benson and his gang catch up to the mole men as they're making their way across the top of a dam. Superman arrives on the scene and offers Benson a warning.
"You're not going to shoot those little creatures. In the first place, they haven't done you any harm. In the second place, they may be radioactive."
Everything the mole people touch begins to glow, but Superman and the others haven't yet figured out if this glowing effect is dangerous radiation or harmless phosphorescence. Anyway, if we've learned anything about Luke Benson in the few minutes we've known him, it's that he don't take no orders from no Superman. An Ubermensch, sure, but not a Superman. One of Luke's gang draws a bead on one of the mole men with his rifle and shoots him off the top of the dam. He screams and falls, but Superman leaps into action, flies to the far side of the dam, catches the mole man, and rushes him to the hospital. Benson and his boys, along with the dogs, chase after the other mole man, eventually cornering him in an old shed. They set fire to the shed, and then, like the true pulp adventure villains that they are, they assume the mole man must be dead by now, and walk away. The mole man pries off one of the floorboards inside the burning shed and is able to crawl away to safety unnoticed. He makes it back to the oil well and climbs down into the shaft. Looking to brag about taking out both of the mole men, Benson and his gang show up at the sheriff's station, where the sheriff informs him that even if the mole man they trapped in the burning shed is dead, that's still only one, because Superman caught the other one who fell from the dam and took him to the hospital. So, Benson gathers his mob again, and they march to the hospital, where the wounded mole man has just undergone surgery. Lois is at the hospital too, and she gets into it with Benson and his cronies until Superman shows up and delivers one of my favorite lines ever spoken by any Superman ever.
"Now I'm going to give you one last chance to stop acting like Nazi stormtroopers."
You tell him, Soups! He goes on to remind Benson and the mob that it was our side who first invaded the home of the mole men, drilling an oil shaft 6 miles into the ground. And furthermore, when the mole men climbed up that shaft to investigate, they were shot at and chased by dogs. The mole man in the hospital, that little creature, as Superman calls him, has as much right to exist as anyone else, Superman declares. And then...
To stay away from the front of the building. Whoever fired that shot came close to killing Miss Lane. Obviously, none of you can be trusted with guns, so I'm going to take them away from you.
Honestly, James Gunn could make Superman Legacy 2 hours of nothing but Superman snatching guns away from mobs of racist white people, and I'd give it 5 stars and never shut up about how great it was. Where's my fan service? Back at the oil well, the mole man who escaped is back with reinforcements, and they've brought along that fearsome Electrolux death ray. The trio of mole men make their way into town. They encounter Superman, who promises that no one will hurt them, then runs into the hospital to get their wounded comrade. While Superman is inside, Benson shows up. He aims his rifle at the mole men, and they attack him with the death ray. Superman comes back, carrying the wounded mole man. He passes him to one of the others, then steps in front of the death ray, shielding Benson. Superman tells the mole men to go home. They deactivate the death ray, turn, and walk away. Then, a grateful Benson walks over to Superman.
You saved my life. That's more than you deserve.
I know I usually say this at the end, but best Superman ever. Superman catches up to the retreating mole men and carries the wounded member of the group as they all walk back to the oil well together. Supes helps them back into the pipe, and then the mole men destroy the shaft from their end, sealing the well to ensure that no one from our world will ever invade theirs, or vice versa, again. Unless someone drills another deep-ass oil well, I guess. The end! Look, I'm not going to argue that this movie isn't cheesy. It is. It's cheesy and cheap and definitely feels more like a TV show than a movie, particularly when looked at through modern eyes. The scale is small, the stakes are low, the production value is even lower, and yet, despite all of those things, if I'm being honest, partially because of those things, I love this movie. I'll start with those low production values since I've mentioned them a few times already. Consider what the producers of this movie were able to accomplish with a relatively low budget, shooting for 2 weeks in 1951. They made a Superman movie. Not a grand cinematic generational event like the one Richard Donner made 27 years later, but an absolutely credible one. Check him out. He's Superman. He's strong. Bullets bounce off of him. He flies. The special effects aren't great, but a few of Superman's takeoffs and landings, accomplished through wire work and sped-up photography, look genuinely impressive. They would mostly abandon the use of wires to create flying effects in the TV series. A wire snapped during production of Superman and the Mole Men, causing George Reeves to fall. After that, he didn't want to fly on wires anymore. Go figure. Which worked out just fine as far as I'm concerned. As cool as this takeoff shot is, I prefer the dynamism of Reeves' Superman taking a running leap out of a window or over the camera, which became his standard takeoff on TV. Actually, my favorite flying shot in the film might be this one, where Superman isn't in the frame at all. It's more of a not a bird's eye view of the street as Superman flies ahead to cut off Benson's angry mob. It's not flashy, it's not trying to impress anyone. There's a simple elegance to it. The producers obviously weren't confident in their ability to show us Superman flying, so they did the next best thing and made us feel like we were flying instead. There are some crummy special effects too. Superman's rescue of the wounded mole man falling from the dam is, unfortunately, one of the cheesiest bits of the film. For the shot of Superman flying into the rescue, the film falls back on the old trick used by the Kirk Allen serials and depicts Superman in cartoon form. Then it cuts to a blink and you'll miss it close-up of Supes catching the mole man, who is obviously a dummy. It should be a thrilling moment, but it winds up as a joke because the technical capabilities of the production just weren't up to it. The character design of the mole people is also not great. These supposedly strange creatures from the center of the earth are portrayed by little people in black outfits and bald caps. The costuming and makeup feel like the results of a combination of limited budget and limited imagination. But those are the exceptions. Most of the rest of the special effects in the film are basic, but fine, especially given the limitations the producers had to work with. And as I said in the previous video of this series about the Adventures of Superman TV series to which this film was a prelude, the best special effect of all is George Reeves. He really is a fantastic Superman, and here, the first time he plays the character, we see that Reeves got it right away. His Superman and his Clark Kent arrive fully formed, just as we see them later on in the TV series. Reeves' Clark is serious and determined, a journalist who knows there's a story here and is intent on getting it. And Reeves' Superman is everything I could want out of the character. Strong, moral, tolerant, kind and patient, but willing to show anger and use force when confronted with bigotry and ignorance. Superman is our hero. Superman is our role model. And from the moment the mole people are spotted in the town, Superman is cautioning the citizens of Silsby against jumping to conclusions and judging the newcomers before they have all the facts. It doesn't work. The mob doesn't listen to Superman. Then again, mobs seldom do. It's one of their most aggravating qualities. But when push comes to shove, Superman shoves back in defense of the mole people. And because he's still Superman, when the mole people fight back and attack Benson, the man who's been riling the rest of the town up against them, Superman steps in and saves Benson. He doesn't attack the mole people. He doesn't withdraw his sympathies and turn against them because they've retaliated against Benson, who was just about to shoot at them when they turned their Electrolux on him. Superman gets it. He doesn't blame them. He simply steps in front of the death ray, calmly tells them to go, and reassures them again that no one will harm them. Then, just in case the message hasn't gotten through to everyone yet, he blows off Benson's thank you, doesn't even look at him, as he tells Benson having his life saved was more than he deserved, and walks away to join the mole people, carrying their wounded man as they return to the oil well. It's Superman saying to the bigot, to the demagogue, I told you the mole people have the same right to exist that you do. I defended your right to exist. I saved your life. That's the minimum, and that's all you get from me. This is a corny B-grade adventure movie from the early 50s, but its portrayal of bigotry and the dangers of empowering that bigotry is dead on. Looked at one way, Luke Benson is a standard issue villain of the week for an adventure series, but when you consider what he represents, Luke Benson becomes a chilling character. He whips up a lynch mob. Literally, at one point later in the film, Benson declares his intention to string up one of the mole men, is party to 2 acts of attempted murder, his man shooting the first mole man off the dam and then ordering his gang to set fire to the shack into which the second mole man has fled, and he and other members of his mob resort to violence against Lois Lane, Corrigan, and Craig the oil company PR guy when they block the door of the hospital where the wounded mole man has been taken. Benson even assaults the town sheriff when the sheriff attempts to arrest him to prevent him from leading his mob to the hospital. When they believe they can get away with it, people like Luke Benson will do anything to act out their twisted, violent values, to force society to look how they think it should look. They will claim to be acting in defense of their community and to uphold law and order, but once they grow powerful enough, they will reject and strike out against anything or anyone that opposes them. We've seen this happen in real life, here in the United States, for a long time, repeatedly, but particularly over the past, 7 years or so. Superman recognizes the larger danger Luke Benson and his mob present. He tells Lois, if we're going to stop this thing, it has to be stopped here and now. People like Luke Benson can't be allowed to accumulate power and influence. They need to be stopped. Now, that's not me saying it. That's Superman. Are you really going to argue with Superman? Now, as much as I appreciate the message of the movie, and I really do, it's not perfect. Superman and the Mole Men often manages to feel thrillingly ahead of its time, and even sadly ahead of our time in some ways, but there are moments that reveal it as very much a product of its time as well. Superman's unflagging defense of the Mole Men, stirring and heroic though it is tempered just a bit by the solution to the conflict, which is basically, we'll get along fine as long as our 2 groups remain completely separate from now on. There are 2 lines of dialogue that have a harsh ring to my ears. The first is this one, from Superman as he's shielding Benson from the Mole Men's death ray.
Go now. No one will harm you. Go back where you belong.
He says it calmly, with kindness, but no matter how kindly you say it, it's hard to make "go back where you belong" sound right in the context of a story about rejecting prejudice in favor of tolerance. The second is a line from Lois. And by the way, since I haven't mentioned her yet, Lois is played by Phyllis Coates, who also plays her in the first season of the TV series. She's not as well remembered as Noelle Neal, but she's a fantastic Lois. And I wish she was in this more. She has her moments. The way she refuses to be intimidated by Benson and the mob outside the hospital is classic Lois Lane, but she's also off-screen for a lot of the film. She does at least get the final line. That's something. Unfortunately, it's this line, spoken right after the mole people have returned home and blown up the oil well.
It's almost as if they were saying, you live your lives, and we'll live ours.
Honestly, I can't blame the mole people for feeling that way. After all, it was humans who, inadvertently, invaded the world of the mole people by drilling the well, and then it was humans who very advertently chased and attacked the mole people when a few of them climbed up to see what the hell was going on. I wouldn't want to associate with humans after that either. It just goes to show how smart the mole people are. They spend a day walking around Texas and decide the best thing for them is to have absolutely nothing to do with humanity whatsoever. Good call, guys. But this being a story that people made up and all, it does feel like a missed opportunity that the solution to the problem didn't involve more peaceful, cooperative interaction between the surface world and the world of the mole people. True, human history has shown time and time again that we're really, really bad at that sort of thing. Such interactions have nearly always devolved into domination and exploitation of one side by the other, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. And it's more consistent with the overall message of the film. Even though it is unmistakably a product of its time, with the limited budget and sometimes limited imagination that goes with that, Superman and the Mole Men remains one of my favorite Superman films and one of the best Superman films as well. It's as stripped down and basic as it can get. Just Superman and Lois Lane, removed from their typical setting and supporting cast, chasing a story, running into trouble, and saving the day by striking a blow against ignorance and prejudice. The scale is small, the scope is narrow, and the runtime is quick, 58 minutes, just barely feature length. But I count all of those as advantages rather than liabilities. I love superhero movies as much as anyone, and if a movie really needs to be 2.5 hours long or longer, I say go for it, but damn what I wouldn't give for the occasional tight, focused 80 or 90-minute superhero film where there's a message worth hearing and the story is staked on the fate of characters we care about rather than the fate of the universe. Give me George Reeves, Phyllis Coates, and a cause worth fighting for. Those are all the ingredients needed for the best Superman ever.